Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like 116 making sure now, and then it's market cap. Oh, really? I mean, I didn't buy too many shares. But that's not right.
Alright guys, I think we can start. So last class we started working with auto layout. We saw how smart layouts help our views be a lot more flexible, and we can also deploy to multiple devices. So last class we started working with auto layouts through Interface Builder, and we're going to do a bit of review in the beginning of class with IP auto layout, but we're going to go straight into code afterwards and learn to programmatically add constraints to auto layout. And what this will mean is that we don't necessarily always need the frame for our elements, since we're going to be aligning them and sizing them with auto layout. Really quick, just to do a content review, what are constraints?
Objects.
They're objects, yep.
Are created. Basically, each constraint only refers to one variable. It could be the width, or the space, to the border, or between two objects.
Yeah, so constraints define relationships, right, between two objects. What constraints do we need to have in our objects? Width, x, and y, right? And the width or height can be inferred based on whether we have a constraint to the top and the bottom, right? So if we have a constraint for the left and the right side, we don't need a constraint for the width, right? If we have a width, we only need a constraint for the one of the x-axis, not the other one, right? Does it make sense? And same concept with the y. So if we have something that has a defined height, we only need to have a starting or ending point for our view, right? Because constraints are smart, so they're good about inferring things based on properties that are already known to us. What is priority?
It says which constraints take effect over other constraints if there's a conflict.
Yep, exactly. Very good. And the conflict is usually indirect, right? So very often we'll have an object that has a relationship, for example, to a parent container. And then we have a sister object or sister view that has a relationship to the parent container as well as the other object itself. Well, we can make the priority of those two sister objects lower than the one of the parent container. So the property or the constraint that relates the right object with the parent container overrides or takes higher priority than the left one, right? In the scenario we did last class, we had a scene. We had a OK button, and then we had a agree terms of services and OK. So this one had a relationship of the left constraint and the bottom constraint with the parent container. And then these two had a vertical space constraint. And then this one had a constraint at the bottom and the right. So the way we handled this was we lowered the priority between this and this, or this and this, and raised it for, or left it still for this one. So this one took priority over this one. Right? So priorities we're not going to be using as much, but priorities are the case that we need things to be more flexible based on certain situations. So again, constraints are certain things are inferred. So if one of those inferred properties to override another one, we can increase or decrease the priority of the one we want to take priority or get pushed over. So I'll do a quick demo just so we can warm up before we get started. And no reason for you guys to follow along, we'll just pay attention just so we're all clear and on the same page. So I'm gonna go back to building a login screen. So we'll have a login text field, or username text field, a password text field. We'll add a text area or a text box, which will have kind of our terms of service, and then we'll have an OK button, and then agree to terms of service and OK. So add a text field here. So I'm not adding constraints yet. I'm just adding all my elements first.
Also, guys, quick tip: if you want to make form interfaces, UI table view is a very good, or in most cases, a very good tool to do that. We've seen it like with dynamic type amount of cells, but you can fix it, and they look really good. Like if you go to your settings app and you go to Facebook or Twitter, the forms that you see, you can log in there. You can make this with a UI table view.
Okay, so I'll have an OK button here.
You mean within the UI view controller, there's the table view element that I can pull in from the object by view. And I can configure those cells to be a username and a password cells.
And they have supplementary views and stuff, like for extra explanation. It's pretty cool. You can do stuff with it. Yes. I posted a screenshot of what we're going to build on Slack. If anyone has extra requests, let me know.
Super cool.
It will be. Can we do it in my apartment?
No.
Yeah.
Did everybody get Slack? Or not Slack, Sketch?
Oh, you can do that?
Yeah, install Sketch, free trial, 30 days. Download it. It will be helpful.
Okay, cool. So we have all of our elements. So for our constraints for our username, what do we need to have here? How do we approach this? So it stays the full width of our view, no matter what the device or orientation.
In that case, we give it the number of points far from the left and the right.
Yep.
And that way it always stays across.
Exactly.
Rather than giving it
Exactly. So we don't give it a width because we want the width to be flexible. So we're going to give it constraints from the right side and left side. So we just give it hard margins, right? Trailing. Exactly. It's a trailing leading. So leading, trailing. Also, what else?
obviously top.
Top. Yep. Cool. So if I want to change those constraints to be just 10 points as opposed to the default, which we don't even know what they are right now, how do I go about changing those? Yeah, so the size attributes. So we'll do trailing space, we'll go 10 points. Leading space, 10 points. Then I'll go ahead and make this like 18. 10 points?
To do minus 10 again, I think.
The what? Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. So trailing again has to be minus 10 as opposed to 10.
Also, we don't need a height here because it's inferred height because UI text field infers the height.
Do you guys remember what inferred means?
Based on all the other.
Yeah. So the height, basic or the width, is inferred based on the content. Cool. Okay. So how do we approach the second one, the password?
You can have vertical spacing coming down from the first one
Okay.
to all the if that's
Yep. So we'll start with that.
Center.
And then we'll do the same thing as the other one for trailing and leading, right?
I'm curious if for the username field, you did not fix the width, we fixed the distances.
Yep.
instead. So if you actually set the password field to equal width, equal height, would it inherit that same quality?
It would.
It would?
Yep.
Okay, so it would change width and height
Yep.
depending on the
Yep.
the layout. Okay.
However, we didn't. It would inherit width and height from this one,
Yeah,
but we still not the spacing, right? We still need the spacing to be in there.
at
So
least the left one.
yeah, so we could be late. The other way of approaching it would be get the width and height from the top one, and then just give you the left one or the right one number of points spacing, and then the other one will be inferred because we have the width and the space from
So
one
you still
corner.
have to do that, go through that exercise.
Exactly. Okay, how do we want to handle the body of text over here? I say let's place this a bit further down from the password and have it relate to our password field, right? So exactly the same thing here. Vertical spacing, and I want to change the vertical spacing here to be 44 is good. Okay, trailing space, leading space. Huh?
Update your frames.
Yeah, so I shouldn't. So what's going on here?
You didn't set up the width
We have a width because we have
on the height.
we have the edges, right?
Yeah, so we have the height.
You just cut it to the bottom, right?
Do we need tie to the bottom? Because the bottom might change, right?
Yeah.
And we already have it tied to a top somewhere, so it's not good practice to tie to the top and the bottom because that defeats the purpose of auto layout, right?
So you set up the height.
So what?
Well, you just need to mark the height.
Yeah, so for this, this is a text area, it's a bit tricky because a text field and a label, they have inferred widths, or a button and a label have inferred widths and heights. And this one, we actually have to set the height for because this is scrollable. Text areas, you can scroll through them, right? You can scroll through content. So I'll add a height to this. Cool. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and run this just to make sure everything is looking good.
The computer is not so fast at running stuff. If you change any to like a smaller or a bigger screen and it's broken, it's gonna be broken when you run it too.
Use the bottom. The left, and the left.
Cool.
You added elements to like any compact screen, and then can you ever push those back up to any screen?
No, not through Interface Builder. You can copy them, but by default, specificity overrides broadness, just like with most programming languages.
Is there any advantage of doing the any compact? Like if we're building an iPhone only app that's not going to be accessed on iPad, should we do the any compact or just stick with any?
Since this has been available, I've always done any. I could see maybe any compact being easier because it's visually like right there, the size. But you have preview right there, you could run it really quickly. So I always do any. How about you, Tomas?
Same thing.
Yeah, there's with auto layout, there's no reason to ever not do any.
Also, it's not because you don't have an iPad app yet that in 2 years you might. I mean, you would benefit from the fact that you did everything in any then.
Yeah.
Well, you would change the size class, right? Size class. Like, let's say you have an app where you have certain functions available, portrait orientation, current landscape, and then you have additional functions available, like you have there actually.
Yeah.
That's the size class, right?
Yeah, that's a size class, yeah. So the benefit of starting with any is when then you get specific. If you add things to any, these elements will be available in those specific size classes, right? But if we went the other way around, they wouldn't be available. Is that kind of what you're saying, Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the iOS calculator app, you switch it to landscape, you have a lot more buttons available. That would be a size class, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
See additional buttons, yeah. Okay, so let's finally wrap this up. I want to center my login button. How do I go about doing that? I want to center it horizontally and tie it to anchor it to the bottom of the screen.
Those are disappearing.
They're disappearing because right now these are specifically at these coordinates.
Yeah.
So when we change the orientation is this high, so we don't access this, right?
And is it, don't you normally lock them though? So it's just saying, continue to appear regardless of rotation?
Yeah, so we need to add those constraints, right? So what are the constraints I need to add to my login? Okay. So to center horizontally, we drag up or down, drag vertically, and center horizontally. And then we need to also give it a bottom constraint. And if I wanted to do both of these at once, what would I have done? Shift. Drag to the bottom and shift, click on both of them, right? Okay, and I'll tie this one again to the bottom, to the right side, and I'll add horizontal spacing. And again, because buttons have intrinsic values, right? Basically, the way buttons work is they have a UI view, and in the view there's a label, and the view size changes specific to the label size. And because the label has intrinsic values, therefore the button itself, the view has intrinsic values.
Is it because you have a conflict between the spacing between your two buttons and things?
Possibly. Let's see here.
I think it's because you're pushing it to the left and right that there's not enough screen space to agree and log in.
So maybe if you
So let's try this again. Let me run this one more
take
time.
the-
Let me make sure that okay.
It's because there's not enough space in portrait mode between login and the agree and log out.
Yeah.
maybe
Although they should have still.
You can delete that one, no?
The center X?
No, and the agree, this guy, yeah.
Oh, the chain space, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
It's gonna look the same. Now it should work, no?
No.
Oh, because it's still too big.
Well, let's try it. Because I was trying to form a relationship also between these two, but there's also a relationship here, so it's
Yeah, let's jump over this way. Well, so what about you take the align to center and then you put it as a lower priority as the other one, so then you push it.
yeah. So let's do that. Let's remove this constraint over here and tie this one directly to our login.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'll remove the trailing over here. And I'll do horizontal spacing. And yeah, so the problem was when we drag constraints from one object to another, the default value that gets assigned to the constraint is the current space between the two objects. So right now, there was quite a bit of space between these two objects. So that's why when we were in the back mode, that was being pushed over a little bit.
What
So-
I was thinking is, I get that it didn't, it wasn't enough space, but because you said that bottom, you tied it to the bottom, I'm confused as why nothing showed up.
No, you had like three little blue dots.
Dots.
Yeah, there were a bunch of
Because
blue dots
the-
in there because nothing was fitting in there.
Takes for jumble.
So I'll change leading space here to instead of 98, I'll make this like 18. Okay. All right, so let's add a bit more text here just to see the effect of removing the adding priority. Agree to terms. Login. Right. So right now this is running off screen. Why is this running off screen?
Because we haven't set up a constraint to the right order.
Yeah, it has no ending point. And Xcode is not yelling at us because technically this still works, right? And it works if the label, if the button is, the intrinsic value is reasonably small. But in this case, you ran past the screen, and Xcode is not making those assumptions, right? So what we want to do is we want to drag this to our trailing. And I want to give this a small value. So if I run this one more time, we now have a boundary between the beginning and the end, right? Does everyone understand what's going on here? Why we're getting this thing?
It's getting squished on both sides, right? Because the logging needs to be in the middle.
Exactly.
And then it needs to be 10 points away, so it only has that much space.
Yeah, exactly. Again, I want to get in the mindset that constraints work through us setting rules, right? And the rules right now for this are that it starts here and it ends here, and everything in between, it's totally up to how large the screen is, whether it gets pushed or not, right?
Could you set a priority in this case that would actually push the log in further to the left as to how
Based
much-
on- Exactly. Yep. So that's what we're gonna do next. So which property would I change in my
The
login?
Align center.
Align center, exactly. So I'll change priority to something like 450. So this moved more towards the left, and now when we have the screen real estate, it resumes its center position. Does anybody still have questions on priority?
So as long as the number is lower than the other one, you'll do it.
Yes. However, what's a bit confusing is that the number needs to, the weight of the number also has an impact. So if you do like 800 instead of 450, it might not move all the way to the left. So you want priority if something wants to, if you want something to totally override its connected constraint object, we need to have something substantially lower. So the degree of which the other one gets moved over by is dependent on that priority number. And there's, to my knowledge, there's no real hard math behind that. There's lots of trial and error. Thomas, do you ever it's pretty much trying things and experimenting.
Yeah. I spend all day doing it, so.
So question, what if, you have like a series of buttons, let's say, I don't know,
8 buttons?
portrait mode.
It's not a very good user experience. But anyway, go ahead.
Sure. So you have those 8 buttons in portrait mode, it would be 4x2, but then you would want, when they're in landscape mode, maybe you have 2x4, and then you want 4x2. Would you be able to do that in any, or would you just need to go one where you design the buttons with
I would almost go for a collection view.
Yeah, I mean, for collection, yeah, there's collection views which we haven't gone over. So the question is, if we have 8 buttons here, and they're all what? They're all vertical?
Or like 4
you
buttons.
you have one next to each other, so you have a row,
Two columns,
each,
4
4
rows.
yeah, 2 columns, 4 rows, and then when you turn it, because you have more screen,
Collection view.
Collection views, the answer for that, yeah.
You would kill yourself in
your
this.
discovery,
Yeah,
trying to do that.
don't try it.
Yeah, you have to.
Collection views are like scroll views, but they allow us to do grids and even more complicated stuff. They're a collection of data, and you can create layouts for them, and that would be a great example for it.
Well, because in practice this, I went home and we created a quirky keyboard with 6 characters, just buttons, and I'm going to lay them out like the keyboard and do the relationship so it's proportional depending on the size of the screen. So
Yeah.
I got all the buttons there, and it works on the iPhone 6 and the iPhone 6 Plus. You keep go down to 4, and then it's all nice and up.
You're trying to recreate the whole keyboard on just buttons
Practice,
Yeah.
But it gets a lot more complicated.
when you have a bunch of elements.
Like, this is simple,
Yeah.
Well, most of our interfaces are going to look like this, and they're not going to be like 30 buttons. But again, a lot of it also comes to trial and error, right? Even after a lot of practice, you still have to constantly check your work. Okay, so any questions on this before we move on to programmatically adding our constraints? So we need constraints for a concrete location, a concrete anchor to the x, concrete anchor to the y, and somehow to infer the width and the height, right? Okay, so now we can do a code along. So I'll create a new project. By the way, did everyone download the resource book I added to our resources folder? This should have all this and everything we've done so far in code and interface. Okay, so programmatic auto layout.
You left it on devices, you left it on iPhone.
Did I? Thanks.
Put it in the resources folder, right? In our
Yeah. So let's sketch out what this will look like. This is especially important when we draw things through code, right? Otherwise, we'll keep running into, we'll keep endlessly tweaking. So give me a layout, guys. What do you want to do for this programmatic auto layout?
Yeah, and at the bottom let's have like a QWERTY keyboard.
Yeah, QWERTY keyboard. Baby steps. Let's do a little Mr. Robot Man that has and a leg over here, so that'll be very pretty. An arm here, 2 arms here, and a head here.
That's almost anything.
Almost a hand, right?
Let's help us out.
Go
From
All right. It's going to be a lot of code because the same concepts still apply in code, but we have to add a line of code, which actually ends up being, that line of code is a long line of code for each one of the constraints. So if you think about it, if you average 3 constraints per object, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 18, and then there's a whole bunch of math to do for that. So it's going to get really long, but I think this is a good challenge.
And also, this would be easier in the interface builder, of course, but today I had a thing that I had to write, and depending on how many buttons entered in the initializer, I had to create those buttons and set constraints for them. So you cannot do something like that in your interface builder because you don't know how many buttons you will have. So you have to do it sometimes.
Yeah. And let's actually make things a bit more interesting. Let's make a starting point our head, and let's add the head in interface builder, and then add everything else in code. That way we know to relate things that already exist with new elements we create in code. So in my storyboard, I'm going to go ahead and add a UI view. And what color is our robot? Blue. We'll start and make all objects a different color, then we can change colors later. Let's also think ahead here as well. So right now our robot is pretty long. What happens when our body or when our orientation changes the landscape?
Well, you know, the torso to
Shrink, right? So how do we approach that? We have our head that's at a set location. So this is constrained from the top, and this is going to be how do we center this put this in the center? Center X, right? So this one just goes out at the top orientation and the center X orientation.
And the two arms are going to be a vertical positioning with regards to the head.
Yeah, exactly. So they'll be vertical positioning. So we'll have top,
And then you can just set the width and the height to be set properly.
How are you going to set that?
So let's have the arms stretch based on the orientation. Right? So we'll have the arms start over here and at 10 points. And then we'll make the body, this is the UI view, we'll have it start right here. So add what is this relationship here?
Vertical.
So this is what, how many points? 0 points, right? Because it's touching the head. And we'll make, how do you want to approach this?
Well, you can make it on the leg. You can do the same type of relationship with the bottom of the body to the leg, and then all you do is the leg, you set the space with the bottom of the screen.
Exactly. Does that make sense? So the legs are the ones that are going to be anchored at the bottom, and the body will stretch depending on the distance between the head and legs. Right? Now there are a few things that are constant here. The arms need to have a certain height, right? Let's give a certain height to the legs as well.
What about the width?
Let's also give it a width for the legs. Sorry, Andrew, what did you say? The body, let's also give it a width. And then spacing for the legs, how will that work? Yeah, so these will just be horizontal spacing with 0 space between the leg and the body, right? So I think that this might be a few more we to add, but I think this gives us a good starting point, right? Cool. Let's start a little robot solder. So over here, walk me through my constraints to interface builder.
Okay, drag one up to the top.
How big is your head?
Yeah, let's give it a quick width and height. So let's do 90 by 90.
Wait a minute, what did you do next to update frames?
Let's not do update frames, because if we update frames here, it moves us off the screen because we haven't anchored it to our X and Y coordinates, right?
No, I just got you.
Yeah, I did by mistake. 90, 90 at the constraints. Right. So Xcode warns us that we're missing certain constraints, right? It shows us where our head will end up. So I'll drag to the top. And which ones do I select here?
Shift. Select both.
Shift select both of them. Very good. Cool. Let's also update our frames. Our warnings go away.
tied and you get the leading and trailing space too, right?
No, because of the center, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
All right. So everything else from this point is going to be through code. So we need to, what's the next step? We need to, this is our starting point, right? So we have to reference this in code. So let's do a control drag to our controller. And I'll call this robot head. I'll just call this head just to make it easy. And maybe if we have time, we'll add some eyes to the robot as well. Add some red evil eyes. Okay. So we have our head. What's the next step? We are going to go and do the body, right? Because our hands are going to be dependent on the body, right? So in code, I'm going to go ahead and clean this up. Give me a second here. So we have a clean interface to work with. Okay, so in code, how do I create a new UI view?
You create a variable and then you take the
Yep. So UI view, right? So what's missing here?
Usually, like we would do frame a few classes ago.
Yeah, right.
So probably like a constraint.
Exactly. Yeah.
Constraint.
So up until this point, we have only done frames, right? Whenever we add a view programmatically, we have to, whenever we instantiate the view, we've done frame, CG rect, then the coordinates and the size, right? Everybody is familiar with it at this point. It'll be something like this: frame, CG rect. Exactly, right? So we're not going to do this over here because our constraints essentially help us do the same thing. Huh? Yeah, so constraints are just like normal objects, right? So we have to create a constraint for every we have to create a variable for every constraint we add. But before we do it, let's go ahead and change the color of the body just so we can reference this later. So we'll do body.background color equals UI color. And let's make this green for now. So first important thing to note here is before we add constraints, we have to add our object to our parent view. So how do I add as a subview to my parent view? Yep. So self.view.add subview, and then we'll do body. Cool. So let's start with the easiest constraint. The easiest constraint is going to be our width because it's going to be static, right? So I'll do a new constant. I'll say body width equals. And then the way we instantiate a constraint object, we do ns layout constraint. And then in there, we open parentheses and we have all these properties. So one thing to note here, Thomas, I don't know how you do it, but for me, whenever I do constraints programmatically, I like to keep things clean. So I always do enter for each attribute so we can easily see what's going on. So after every comma, start a new line. So for the item will be the body. The attributes, so we have two options for both attributes and relations. We have the option of just doing period width or period left and do the relation just period. But for constraints, because we're working with so many properties, it's easier to just leave the whole keyword and then do the property itself. So for the attribute, we do NS layout attribute. And then dot. And then we'll do the width. So related by. And by the way, if you want to be able to select what's on there, you press tab and enter, and then the right arrow. So it selects it, highlights it. Then to remove the highlight, just press the right arrow key. So I'll go back. So I'm over here, I press tab, it takes me over there. I press enter, highlights it. I press the right arrow key to go to the end of the line. Otherwise, it'll be a bit difficult to select it. So we do an NS layout relation, and then we do dot equal. So the dot equal is the same as when we go in our left sidebar. And you have your constraint over here. So this over here is equal, right? You can have this be less or larger than, and then be more flexible. But for most of the time, for 99% of the time, it's almost always going to be equal. Okay. So now we need to relate it to an item. So this is where if we have a sister object that we want to get its properties from, this is where we list it. So if I had another head that I wanted to equal size, this is where I reference the head. However, because this is not going to, the width is going to be static, it won't reference anything else, we'll just do the overall parent view for now. So how do I access the parent view?
Self.view.
Yep, so I do self.view. So this to item is the thing that you get properties from. But in our case, we're not going to. So for attribute, we're going to do dot width.
What is to item refer to?
The thing that you get its properties from. Cool. Everybody has this? So the multiplier, can someone describe to me what the multiplier does?
Yeah, like readjusts the value that the constraint value that you're placing on it.
Yeah.
From whatever item.
From the other place.
Yeah, that you're
Exactly.
getting from.
Right. So if I want to have my width equal exactly the width of whatever the to item is, the multiplier stays as 1. If I want it to be half its size, the multiplier is 0.5, and so on. You can change this. It's very flexible. And then this is to be
I
capitalized.
feel like on Monday the multiplier was inverse though. So I mean I could totally be just remembering this wrong by the example you drew on the board, but I just want to make sure I get that right.
Sure.
So the multiplier. So if I want something to be half as large as its parent, I put 0.5. I don't put 2.
Yep, exactly. So why don't we actually go into the relationship? So let's actually, since we have access to the head, let's make our body be roughly half the size of the head and make it a bit more dynamic. So everything will be based on the head. So let's do this. Let's do, instead of doing self.view, let's do self.head. And then we'll do the multiplier as 1.
Should it be 1 or 1.0?
It doesn't matter in this instance. 1.0 should work.
Did you say you wanted to be half as wide? No,
Yeah, so what do I change here?
multiplier by 5.
Yep, so multiplier is 0.5.
Then what's the constant?
So the constant is, if this actually didn't relate to anything, I'm sorry, the actual, if this didn't relate to anything, which is the width, this should be nil, 2 item. But the constant is, if it doesn't relate to anything, we can set a sort, we can hard code it, or we can add additional points to this value over here. So if we want this to be half the size of the head plus 20 points, we also add 20 to the constant.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Can you just go back to wait? So if we didn't want it to relate to anything,
Yeah.
the 2 items would be nil.
Yeah, so
So
if you set a static size or static attribute, the 2 item is set to nil.
self.view.
Exactly. Sorry about that. Yeah, that was my bad. Okay.
What would happen if you left that self.view? 'Cause
It
that
would
didn't make sense.
gather the size of the view over here. So it would have gotten the size of this. So the width would have been this size over here. Okay. So I'm gonna label this because it's gonna get very long, as you can see. This is just one constraint, and we're gonna have like 30. So we'll say constraints for the body. And this is body width is fine. Okay. So we have the width. What's next?
The vertical positioning.
The vertical positioning. So where is our body going to be positioned?
0 under the head.
Yep. So we'll do body vertical position equals NS layout constraint. And I'm actually just gonna copy the previous one because so we don't have to press enter for each one again. Okay, so the vertical position will still relate to the head, right? It'll be directly under the head. So what is our starting point of our body?
Well, it's the bottom.
The bottom of the head, right? So over here, instead of doing, we're gonna relate by not the width attribute, we'll relate by the bottom attribute, right? And the attribute we're gonna change is the top. So for this one, we want to take the bottom attribute of the head. So what this says is we are laying out the top of our body at the bottom of our head, right? So we're laying out our body starting right here. That's our vertical position.
Just the first attribute and the second one.
Yep.
The first one is the attribute that we are manipulating right now.
Yep.
And the second one is what we are inheriting from what we're referring to, at least if not inheriting.
Exactly.
What do you need a multiplier in say NSA attribute of time?
It's just a requirement, so just leave it as one. Yeah.
And so the constant, it's gonna be 0 because the constant is at 0, but if you want it to be 10 points below the head, then
You'll have a floating head 10 points above the body. Yeah.
10 points.
Okay. So now is the trickier part. How do we lay this thing out in the middle of the head?
Center
Divide
X,
the
that's
width.
center X.
It's a what?
Divide the
Divide the width of the what?
width of the head by 2. Exactly.
So it starts, so the left position is where we're going to set, right? Either left or the right. So if we divide the width of the head by 2, we're right here, right? But our body then gets laid out over here, right? So how do we get the leading space or the trailing space that we need here?
That's center X.
Oh yeah, and
Minus
this
the-
and this they attribute left, and then we have the half of the width of the head.
Yeah, that's all right. So we get, or we could just subtract the width of the head minus the body, and then that's what Lisa was saying, and then divide, and then get the left position. So let's lay this out so you can see in code how this works. So I'm going to call this body horizontal position. And the attribute that we are manipulating is which one?
Left.
Leading or left? I'll be leading since we're used to that. It's the same thing essentially.
Sorry, you could have written left.
Huh?
Instead of leading, you could have put left.
Yeah, it looks the same way. Okay. So we want to start with, where do we start with the head?
We'll start with the width of the head, right? So.
Or no, it shouldn't be.
No, you can start with.
NSA attribute bottom left, and then you add some constant, which is gonna be actually dot dot as
Can you
something.
Can you return the leading valve, whatever the leading constraint is from the head?
Mhm.
So then it would be that times 2 minus the width would give you.
So where do I set that? Is it times 2 or divided by 2? So
You need to add some numbers.
So this is a very tricky example, by the way. You're not gonna usually deal with this, but we're jumping into the weeds right away. So we have a head. And the head is, we'll say 20 from left, 20 from the right. And then we have, and then the head itself is, how many points was this? 90? And then the body was 45, right?
It's like 22 and a half on either side.
So it needs to be 22 and a half. Why 22 and a half?
Because 45,
90 minus 45, which is
so you have 45.
45 or
90 divided by
22 and a half, right?
4 essentially. Does that work with half points?
With what?
Would it work with half points?
You can get much
All
more.
these are floats.
So then our attribute is correct. We start at NSIR attribute left, which is gonna be
Plus.
the self head, right?
Yep.
And then the constant
We move it.
you
move
just
it, right?
issue self.head.width divided by 4, and then you get your 20.
No, can't you
Divide by
just,
4 or divide by 2?
Divided by 4 because you only want to move it 20.
Because you already have the 2, right? Yeah, you're right.
why can't we just say NS layout attribute dot leading and then assign a constant of 22?
Dot leading where? Oh, 22 and a half? Because it's not always going to be 22 and a half. The head is centered, so that 22 and a half is dynamic based on my orientation and device. Right, so
Okay, or you could you do, yeah.
so like I said, it was actually correct. So we do self.head.frame.width divided by 4.
But since the width doesn't change, I think what they were saying is we could actually in the constant part put 20.5 and then that's the width, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, actually, you're right. Yeah.
But I don't know if I am right. Is our width hard coded in the square in the head?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then you're putting it for.
Now,
So that's-
it's always, that's there because that depends on the change.
So
Do
that's
you
what
want to
you're
center it in relation to the head?
It does, right?
Or does this-
So by default, if it starts, by default, if you do leading and leading on left here, by default, we're over here, right? So we already know that bodies have the size, right? So what are we left with? We're left with half the size, right? So we want half of the half, therefore divide by 4.
Because we only want, basically we want to add 22.5 to
Yeah.
the
Don't worry about the math right now.
Yeah.
It's beyond the point. But basically, we're moving it from the starting left point a quarter of the overall distance of the head.
Is that better than just aligning it?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point as well. So right now our head is aligned horizontally.
Yeah.
So technically we could have aligned it horizontally as well. But I think it's more fun and challenges a bit more. And our head might not always be vertically or horizontally centered for this purpose, right? Again, tons of different ways to go about it.
Can you just describe again the difference, like what we're saying when it's dot left? In relation to the head.
So we're saying that, and I'll stick the leading for now. So we're saying that the leading constraint for this one will be exactly the same as the leading constraint
From the head.
from the head.
Okay, I was just wondering like why it was left.
Yeah, it's the same thing for our purposes.
The left and the right gives you the advantage that you could, if you stack two things next to each other, you can take this position by asking for this guy's right. While its leading might be 0 because if they're close to next to each other, it's going to be 0. But its right is going to be enough for you to know where to position this guy, which is so that's the difference between leading and trailing and left and right.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
So leading and trailing, sorry. Leading and trailing refers to the edges or the corners.
Yeah, so you
of
can
the
have
cube.
two things together, and your trailing of this guy would be 0, and your leading of this guy would be 0. But you can say that this guy's left is going to be 200, but this guy's width is 200. Yep.
For the body vertical position, would you want to multiply by 2 in order to make it longer than the head?
Yeah, we haven't set the height yet. Oh, are you talking about? Yeah, talking about the height of the width.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll set the height later
Okay.
because the height will be dynamic based on our orientation, right?
Yeah.
But it is worthwhile for us to test this. So right now we have the width, we have the left, and we have the y, right? The x and the y. So what's the last thing that's missing? The height. right? So for now, let's just do a static height and we'll change this later, just so we can see this in action. So you can get a quick win.
Quick win is that small.
That's important. When you're coding, you have to like give yourself some easy wins or quick wins before you do it. It gives you energy to continue.
We need to talk about your definition.
Well, if you code like all these things, all these constraints for our 5 elements, it's going to be like over 200 lines of code, and debugging later is going to be a big pain. So we're going to make sure that we're on the right track.
We do this absolutely have to in some situations.
I know, so why are we doing this?
Okay, so let's set the
This thing is itchy. This has, no, I knew you were going to say that. In a crazy world, if the body was inside the head, I just want to remember the syntax. We have.
If the body was inside the head.
If the body was inside the head, which in my case is happening right now, with all this going on. You know how we have the self.view.add subview body?
Yeah.
And we have it that way because it refers to the big UI view controller. If it was, just reminding of the syntax, if it was contained within another object, how would that?
So you do, say I had a body.
Say the body's inside the head.
Self.head.add subview, and then body.
Self.head, add subview in brackets.
Body.
Head, okay, got
It's a little existential dilemma we're going through. Okay, so we'll set the height. And then we'll do the 2-item nil for now because this will not relate to anything. It's going to relate to itself. And then we'll set. Huh?
Did you copy paste it?
Yeah, I'm going to just copy paste this every time and just change the properties.
Why did you make it nil?
Because we don't want it to relate to something, we're going to set it to a fixed height.
Yeah.
Okay.
Why are you yelling at me? I'll get back to this in a second. Okay.
You don't have a parenthesis at the end, but
Ah, thank you. I think it's always breaking everything. So now, because it's not related to anything, we have to actually give it a static constant, right? So right now, our 2-item is nil. So whenever we have a nil 2-item, we have to hard code our size, right? So let's go back and do a case set. Let's make the height of this thing twice the height of the head.
So the head, the frame, the height.
Height times 2.
But why wouldn't we change the multiplier? You already related it to the five.
Right.
Yeah, why-
So then how would it do this in relation if I didn't do nil and there's this as static? How would it set this to twice the head?
Well, 2-item would be
Oh, that's on self dot.
NS, the self dot head, the height, the frame, the
So then I just do multiplier times 2,
Yeah.
and then very good.
and that's.
Now, sorry, it is possible to mix springs and struts and frames with auto layouts. For our purposes, though, there was no reason to, and most of the time you want to stick to apples and apples, but you certainly can do that. Did you have a question, Dave?
yeah, it's just I was gonna ask when the 2-item is nil, you're not referring to anything. You still have to have an attribute referring to something.
Yeah.
What is that pointing to?
Nothing.
So you just have to have something there, can't do it.
Yes, because height attribute of nil is 0, right?
It's like, no.
Non-existent has 0 height, right? So Okay, so let's try this out and cross our fingers. Nothing here, right? Why is that?
You make a color, you didn't specify color.
We have a green color.
Yeah.
Well, we can't.
Yeah,
we
I
don't
don't
see-
see it from
Yeah.
refresh.
Yeah, so right now these are objects,
Oh.
and these objects are not really tied to anything, right? They're referencing, but we have to also encode, as a last step, add our objects, our constraints to our objects, right? Yeah, so this point is, I want us to focus on a little bit. So constraints are objects, right? And if I select my object here and I see these constraints are still on this level, right? Right? So for me to add the constraints, I need to add the constraints to my parent container. So because my body belongs to my parent container, the body constraints will also belong to the parent container in this case. So how do I reference the parent container for the body? Self.view dot add constraint. And there's two ways of us to do this. So I can do body width, right? But this gets pretty cumbersome because now we have to do this, what, 5 more times? So we can actually pass an array to an add constraints method. So instead of doing add constraint, we do add constraints. And in here, we could pass as an array all of the constants that we defined. So we have body width, body vertical position, body horizontal position, and body height.
Yes, but so can you explain to me again why we're doing this?
Because our constraints are objects,
Yes.
and our objects, just like with views, we have to add them to as a subview to our parent container. We have to do the same thing with constraints. We have to add them to our parent container.
It's interesting that,
Uh-oh. Was it, Dave?
it's just interesting you don't assign them to the object that you created.
You what?
It's
Sorry?
interesting that you don't like do like a like body dot constraints equals body width, body height, body.
You actually should also be able to do that. I'm just used to always usually add them to parent view, right? I usually add them to parent view as well, but you can also add them to the subview, I believe.
You scroll down on the
So there's some kind of conflict with our constraints.
Does it have something to do with your body?
So,
Always laugh when you get error messages like that.
yeah.
I did not.
So let's see. I wonder if I can do just no.
Access kind of.
It should be able to.
Is it already set?
It's already set. Yeah, let me do a quick breakpoint here. I think it might be have to do with.
try doing description of head itself with head.
Which one?
Self.head, because it's the one you use if you go into yourself.
Yeah.
No, you can do it over there.
Where's the self that I'm missing it? Oh, self right here.
Self,
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
Different description of head.
Yeah.
I don't know if you already have.
What's the best way to download simulator again? It's in one
Go to your preferences and you have a. I don't think it already has a frame
Yeah, you're right. You're right. That's what it is.
because that happens in split layout subviews, right?
Yeah.
Which is not here.
Yeah, that's right.
Uh,
Yeah. So the problem here is that our head does not yet have a flat frame, and this is happening before our head is being printed on the screen, right? So instead of doing, because we had our head through interface builder, right?
Referencing something that doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Your constraints get translated into frames in view layout subviews, I think so. So there you
Yep.
could access a frame of each element, but here it's not existing yet.
Yeah. We can, but that's kind of a long way of going about it. So I'd rather just change this and make it a bit more dynamic, right? So let's use our heads. What do we do with this? So the width, the instead of doing width divided by 4,
0.25.
It's
And then do self.
2.5.
20.5. I'm thinking if we could make this dynamic, but for the purpose of this, just do 20.5.
But wait, so if you say head is not created, can we reference to self.head then in the item? You guys have been created yet?
In a frame has not been
We
created.
can, but it's not been laid out yet.
Well, if you did do 2.5, then when you rotate it, it's
It's still gonna be
Squares.
2.5.
You're right, it's still 20.5. Yeah, so it's not
Right.
dynamic,
So,
right?
but
It'll
can't-
stay
but
to
can't
the
you-
left.
If you don't have a head that you can refer to, can't you refer to the UI view controller itself?
So you're gonna do center over there, but our head doesn't change size. Our head still stays the same
And it
size.
still says center.
Yeah, it still
So
stays
always gonna
center.
be 22.5.
So in this case, it will be static. So let's try this real quick.
Yeah.
You guys not change the size.
So let-
We need to deal with geometric shapes.
Okay. I'm gonna do a quick preview here.
Multiplier to 0.2.
What?
You do,
What if the multiplier of 0.25 with constraint becomes constant is 0?
Why 0.25 for the multiplier?
Because it's a fourth of the head.
But that way it'll be all the way to the left because it won't start at the exact same spot.
Center it in reference to the head then? Center X.
Perhaps. Let me do a quick.
without leaving your two items nil, then you can use leading, and then you just add self.head after that was 504.
Okay, let's try that. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so nothing. So it has something to do with our positioning. Okay. So let's run through this. We have the width. The width looks right. We have the
What we can do to be 100% sure that that is the one that we're looking at is copy all this code and do it in view layout subviews for just debugging now, because it might be another one, right?
For what?
Are we sure it's this one that is?
yeah, no, we're not.
What if you put the frame back and put all this code in view layout subviews, then your frame will be new. I
Okay.
mean, it's bad practice, but for debugging.
Yeah, let's try it. So Tomas's point was, instead of doing vdid load, let's add all this code to, there's another method we have that's called subview loads. So whenever everything in our view loads, that's when we run this code. So if we go in our UI view controller, go.
I would use the layout.
Yeah, did layouts. So I'll do an override function, and no need to follow along yet. We're just debugging. Okay.
You can try putting your frame back. Oh, it's there. Great.
Yeah,
Yes, it's not bad.
it's not that.
You need the height, because the height is the only one you have like two identical. Like all the others, they reference self.head, but then height reference to.
Or height is actually self.head as well, and we did it twice. The self.head. We changed it from now.
Just go away, we just create.
I don't think so because we still have reference to the head. So we added a subview. Let's see. Now, this is one of the ambiguous errors where it doesn't really tell us very much.
So one is the height, right? If you scroll down a little bit in your height and center X.
Which one?
So he's complaining about something that has a center X value and a height, right? If you look here, height and center X. Also, this is not something you have to change, right?
Yeah, so there's actually one thing here. So this right here, we have to tell it that we're going to rely on creating our views through constraints throughout a layout. So there's actually a method we have to add before we add the constraints. So we do body dot set translates auto resizing or auto resize mask to false. So basically, all this does is saying, hey, we don't want to infer anything from springs and struts. Huh?
Yeah, I read mine. Also.
Yeah, that's what it was. That's what it was. Yeah, so what was happening was it was inferring a whole bunch of things on springs and struts. So whenever this actually has happened before, it's driven me mad. Whenever we add constraints programmatically, we need to first do translate auto resizing mask into constraints false. So we're by default now setting our position and our size through constraints.
Never forget.
Never forget. And I obviously still forget. So the head frame actually was available to us in bigger load. Yeah.
So do we have to set this for each object? This set translates auto resizing mask.
For every object that we had constraints to, only once per object. Yeah.
You're right, Benny. The width and the height is already available in VDIT, but the X and Y.
X and Y, yeah, it's not.
Remember that.
Yeah.
How
that
do you
is
structure this code professionally? Like, would you put it together in its own class or?
I'll probably do a function and then do like generate body, and the body would have the top code and the constraints. So over here, I would say generate body, generate arms, generate legs, etc., etc.
And then the functions in their own file.
Yeah. No, the functions will be all in this file.
So you will still end up with this much code somewhere in your file.
Yeah. So we'll do that as the last step.
Just scroll up real quick just to make sure I have the body. Go a little bit more unless someone else needs to.
Higher or lower?
run fire else.
So guys, if we're adding a single constraint, do the paired view does add constraint singular and the single constraint. If we're adding a whole bunch of constraints for something, we do constraints plural and add other constraints in an array.
I didn't get the reason why we added that last line.
So this right here,
Yeah. that-
because constraints are objects, right? So think about it this way: when you add a view to a code programmatically, you need to add a subview, right? Because a view is an object. Constraints are objects as well, so we have to add them as sub-objects to whatever we're adding them to. Right now, we're defining them, but we haven't added them anywhere.
So this is like the subview concept
Exactly,
that we did for the
exactly. And technically, it's what it is. It's sub-views, kind of, but they're rules. In the It kind of looks like one of those. What was those things that had the candy inside? Was it Pez's? Yes. Looks like a Pez.
Oh, yeah,
A Pez head.
Oh,
Okay. So.
It's funny, you have the method in your slides,
In my what?
like in your slides that you were.
Oh, I do. Yeah. Yeah. Should refer to my own notes. Okay.
Debugging is good.
Yeah.
The best way you learn a new programming language is when you're debugging and you have to go through with a microscope for everything.
Yeah, I've actually learned.
Yeah. Okay, so we have the head, we have the body. What's the next step?
The arms.
The arms. Let's do arms. It's gonna be using the legs, I think. So, how do I create a new arm?
Like a bar, left arm.
Left arm equals UI view, right?
What is next? Important line.
Left arm dot set translate.
What? Oh, right. Well, let's. No. So there's one more step before that.
You gotta self that view that add. Well, the background color, which is
Background color. Equals black. And then
what you have to know.
we could do that one. What's the step after that?
The step after that would be setting the constraints.
There's one more before that. Because right now we have the view, but the view doesn't belong to anything. Right?
Okay, so subview.
So where do we add the subview to?
Self view.
You add subview.
And then finally, Left arm. false, right? Does everyone understand what it does?
No, I just memorized it. I didn't understand actually the reason why we added that or had that.
So this is saying that by default, we don't want this view to expect a frame inside there. So we're saying that by default, we're removing the frame element because we're going to be using an array.
Does that only work because we're designing everything about that UI view programmatically? What if we did kind of half and half? Would it be possible or not?
If you did half and half,
Like,
if you did half and
for
half,
example, we-
it would work. You would have to do that if you had set no constraints. But I believe if you set one constraint, then you wouldn't have to do that because it does it automatically.
So for example, if I go in interface builder and I design my body and
Yep.
let's say I make it 115 length by 45 in width. So but that's all I do in the interface builder. And then I were to come here and define the positioning of my body, not its width and height, but its positioning with regards to the head. So would I still need to do set translator size?
No, not if you already set some constraints in your interface builder.
Okay.
That's a good question.
You started to say towards the end there, so removing these elements.
Which one?
About the set translates auto resizing. You said something about removing from elements.
So basically, when we create a new UI view, we have to frame, CDirect, whatever. So unless we set this, it's gonna expect the frame,
Frame.
right? So it's saying, let's not expect the frame because we're gonna add constraints, essentially. Okay. Now we can start adding the constraints. And there's an easy one. The easy one is the height, right? So let's do left arm height. And I'm just going to copy this again. So the item over here, remember, is left arm. And then the to item, because we're going to set a static height, we'll set this to nil. And then we'll do a multiplier 1. And let's give it a height of 30 points. For now, we can change later.
Debbie, what if you wanted to have the body be built, the iterations, so one by one, and how do you
What do you mean?
tell it in code that when this action happens, make the head to make the body appear. When this action happens, make the arm appear. You know,
What actions?
Anything, someone clicks a button or.
So you just all in a function and just call it function.
Just call function, okay.
Now, one thing to note here, quick pop quiz. If I put all these in functions and all of these things related to each other, how would that work?
You have to be careful of what you're calling at what time, right? You probably want to put it in the view to load, and then you'd want to. No, it's going to be outside.
Well, the function, you put the function in the view load. Defining the function is going to be outside of the area.
Yeah, so there's a few ways to go about it. The way I would go is I would do this var left arm UI view at the top before view load, and then when view load, and then I would add all this code in the function, and then the function I would refer to self.left arm and set those properties. So if I was to put all these in the function, right? So if I said function, right? Function, no need to follow along here. Make left arm. I'll put these in here. I would have to do var left arm up here so I could reference it in my function. Does that make sense? Right? Otherwise, if I inherited properties from my right arm, I wouldn't have access to the right arm. Right?
That would actually make a lot of sense because then we could just like create the right arm and the left arm.
Definitely. Yep. All right, so we have the height. Next, let's so we said that the arms would have of an x and y coordinate, but it would expand the whole width, right? So let's do our top for the left arm first. So how do I do that?
You copy the body vertical position to the exact same.
Body vertical position. So then again, the item is left arm. Does anybody have any questions as to why the rest of these elements stay the same? Because just like the body, the arm starts right below the head, right? Yeah. Also, one more note here. There's one property we're missing here. Can anyone tell me which property we're missing? Huh? In all of them, by default, it's missing the property. We're missing the priority, right? So if you want to do priority, you just do left arm top dot priority equals the number. But we're not worrying about that right now. Okay, so we have the top. What's the next one? the
Or the, so
the
horizontal.
the horizontal position, right?
It's gonna be two sets, right? Because it's gonna be with regards to self-done view, you've got, margin, whatever,
Yeah.
and then, body margin.
Yeah. So because our arm has a dynamic start and end, we have to set two axes, right? So it starts at the edge of our super view, and it ends in the left side of our body, right? Cool. So I'll do left arm leading. So what do I reference as my relation item?
It's gonna be self-done view.
Yep. And then let's do the same thing with our right arm, or I'm sorry, with our ending, left arm trailing. So let left arm trailing equals and then this is leading attribute right. So yep, we do self-led body. And why am I doing body instead of self-led body?
Because, body doesn't exist because it's in the view.
Yeah, body is our function and not as a class property, right?
How come you did right and not trailing?
Yeah, this will both work in this situation.
The attribute's left again because you're taking reference to the body,
The left side of the body, right?
the left side of the body.
Exactly. So, oh, this won't run yet. So what's our left step?
Well, add constraints.
Yep. So left arm dot add constraints. This will be an array. And we'll do height, top. Okay, another error. Thank you. Good call. So if I want to make the arm not necessarily touch the edge, but be like 20 points from the edge, what do I do?
Or get 22 the constant. Or make up the
Leading. Right. So it goes to the very left of the screen and you push it over 20 points.
You could also do dot leading margin. Or no.
Technically it would work here, but I don't want to touch it today.
Okay.
Yeah. But it would work.
Sorry, Mr. Woods, why did you put 20 for constant?
Because if we do self the view, the leading, it hits the very corner,
Yeah.
right? But if we want to push over 20,
Oh,
the constant adds to that value already.
I guess, so we're doing the other arm with -20.
So why don't we do the other arm as an exercise solo? So do the right arm. Get some coffee.
Oh, so it's 2 different ways to.
Yes, you can.
Did you do priority again?
I'm sorry?
How do you do priority again?
You do constraint dot priority equals. So we do priority for left arm leading. Left arm leading the priority equals 450. What do you do, guys?
I don't know.
Whoa, what happened?
Do you mean what? So it works before I end, before I get on.
Before you do left arm?
affects the head. And
So one way increasing the type of work online.
which I had at first.
You did?
Yeah, at first, this body.
Any step would work.
Still weird why we shouldn't property than the other objects.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Any edits?
I mean, I think it works because it's a square, so it doesn't really matter. But it doesn't explain why it's not.
All right.
He doesn't want to make I'm thinking about just. Just square.
And same thing. That's very.
Okay. So the way you draw it is you give set height to the legs, and then make the body fun.
So I had that. Problems with just because I can't figure out like since this is falling it's on before I actually just created a variable right down here.
Yeah, so same reference like this, right?
Right.
So just create the legs of the body.
Well, then there's I'm tying the leg to the body and body head.
Yeah, so for the leg, you give it a set height. But you're gonna make problems. So the leg ties to the body and give it a height.
I know what's
There,
happening.
leg where you want to use. Just when you tie the body.
Yeah, I'm using the leg, using the body and for the
I read it over
x-axis.
Oh,
And like I can't really use the arm for the x-axis either.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
So I'm gonna say
So that's what I was trying to set priority.
10.
The constraints down here, so like I could very easily just copy this and visualize it as a character. Just create a variable. So it exists, but then I like to set priority to these constraints over the bottom, right? Is that the way to do it?
No, it's not priority, but you can bring it in. I didn't think about that. So,
do is you can actually, you can override the body constraint for the height of body after the legs.
Okay. So then, falls.
But I'd have to change this from black to gray.
Yeah. Do you have any problem with that as well?
No, so just thing that's happening with that. So down there, and also it's twice the head. But it doesn't make sense because body weight, so body weight, head.
Otherwise, my mobile would be handicapped.
There's guy in gym actually.
I already told me this.
Yeah.
Really
So that people can hear to the
Right.
because the
curving
one.
Yeah.
He's got a-
Yeah. Yeah.
And, yeah, it's got like, it's in a shoe, like a foot, shoe, but everything else is just, that's nice. Really impressive. He's such a guy.
What's really fine to that?
So I can tell.
Sure, it's on there. Like, you can't leave it just-
Well, he probably take it up at night. And then shower again. It's kind
No,
of
I
like
don't
size.
because I wasn't
Or-
clarified as well.
Yeah.
So it's easy, you need to be just like, the range of motion you get, your accessibility.
You probably had it, you're right.
Obviously, everything's fitted to your leg.
Right.
Whatever.
And they are expensive, they're so expensive, I mean, if you're not a veteran, you have to give them that.
Which is unfortunate. Everyone should have those.
Okay.
It's not. Like he is right now. Okay, that's-
what is equal in reference to? It's related by, what is equal in reference to?
So,
The leading.
so how I do this is like, the first action is like, so, okay, what thing are you trying to, and then what of the left leg, what thing do you want to change? That's the thing. Okay, so you're saying left leg, dot,
Yeah.
and then the divide is it equal to,
Negative
greater than,
right side up.
So something here.
which is that two.
The two, oh, the two, okay, but in this case, it's, wow. Initially, the head.
So you're going this right, that's
Or
I mean, if you get more,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just like, that's really just
Yeah.
So that's how it's done, like,
Oh,
it's like,
okay.
I just change that, right? It's like,
So just looking at it, just like, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, it's just about the story.
Were you really? What were you doing all this time?
I think I had to take a call for work.
But I'll go over this. So let's do this together. We'll do this very quickly. So we'll do So what's my first step for right arm? I have to create the right arm, right? UI view. And then right arm dot background color equals UI color dot black color. And then self dot view dot add subview. Guys, remember this step. It's important to always add the view as a subview before you set the constraints. So I'll add right arm. And then we do right arm dot set translates false. Now we can start setting everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to I'm going to start with, I want to copy and paste everything from my left arm and just rename to right arm. So I'll do right arm trailing, right arm leading, right arm top, right arm height. So for the height, there's two ways we can go about it. We can hard code it, or we can make it equal to the same to the left arm. Yep. So I'll do right arm, and then just for the purpose of setting this another way, I want to relate this to my left arm. So what this does is it sets the right arm to be equal to the same height as the left arm, right? Everyone clear on that? Sorry? Yeah, so I had it nil before because the left arm was drawing height out of nowhere, so it didn't relate to anything. Oh, you didn't have it there. Yeah. Okay, so then right arm. So the right arm top is going to be exactly the same, or we're going to relate it to our left arm, but I'm just going to stick to the same code base since we're familiar with this for now. So right arm leading is going to be similar to our right arm trailing, right? So our right arm starts where our right side of our body ends, right? So we access the body here. And we access the trailing. And this is 0. So we're saying our right arm starts where our body ends, right, on the right corner of our right side of our body. So the trailing, where does that? How does it work?
Still left arm. For left, right arm.
Thank you. So where does the right arm trailing go to? Self.view, right, and 20. All right. And then add those to our view. Thank you. Remember -20, just like in our, when we drag and dropped?
Yeah.
And if I resize, we have long arms. Any questions on this so far? All right. So next we have our left leg. So Duvar, left leg, should have frozen this for now, by now. UI view, left leg, dot background color. We'll make the legs black as well. And then we'll add to the sub view, left leg. Then left leg dot set false. So now these are constraints, right? So our leg constraints, how are those going to work? They're going to be, we decided to leave our legs a set height, right? And the other known for our legs so far is the distance from the bottom of our screen, right? So we said the legs would span to the very bottom of the screen, and the body would flex depending on our height, right? So the first constraint, let's start with the easy ones. Let's set the height. So I'll do left leg height equals NS layout constraint. No. So our item is left leg. And we're setting the height. And we'll do the to item to nil because we're setting a static height. And how high do you want to make our legs? Let's go 40 pixels, 40 points. So what's the next constraint we set? The width, okay. How wide do we want our legs to be? We can make them the same width as our body, right? So we'll do left leg width equals left leg width width 0. And what do I set it to item? Body. Very good. Width. Okay, next. What do we set the vertical position to? Bottom of the body or bottom of the? So the body is what changes. So how does it know where the body starts, right? So the body is gonna change based on the position of our legs, right? Our body is flexible, our legs are not, right? So
to
Just
define
gonna
space
space
between
between
the
the
and so we can UI view it.
sorry, what was that?
We need to define a space, a vertical space in between the bottom of the super view and.
Exactly.
So then we will go back to the body and change the height to reference the leg.
Yep. Yep. So we do left leg bottom. Self view bottom. And I'm also gonna have this sort of extends to maybe 10 points. So it's not touching the bottom. Or maybe we want to touch the bottom, right? We don't want to float. So let's have it like stuck at the very bottom of the screen. So let's set this to 0. So what's the last thing we're missing?
But if you wanted it to be above the screen, obviously you would increase the constant.
Exactly, 10 or 20 or whatever.
We don't have the horizontal position.
Yeah, so we need the horizontal position. So where is it going to be placed?
It's going to be placed to, well, if it's the left leg, it's going to be placed to the right, to the left of the body.
Exactly. So left leg leading. It is trailing, you're right. Yeah. Trailing equals.
Look at the left leg, how we're looking at it, right? And it facing us, but we're facing the right, so it's the left, it's our left.
Yes, it's the left leg, yeah. Yeah. It's all nomenclature. 0. Yeah. So we're gonna run into a chicken and egg problem in a second, right? And we'll see why Rob did this, so we run into the same problem with him. So let's add all of our constraints to a super view.
Problem because the height of the body is determined by the position of the leg, but the position of the leg on the
Right.
horizontal basis is determined by the body itself.
Right, exactly. Height is 40. Oh, we might have to make our height larger. Let's make our height like 120 for our left leg. There we go. So remember, guys, our rule where we initially set this was our body, the bottom of our body was going to be directly correlated to the top of our legs, right? But we're into a chicken and egg problem because we set our body, and our body doesn't know of our legs yet, and our legs have to know of our body.
So could you set the bottom of your body based on the bottom of the self view minus the height of the leg, and then that's basically you don't. The leg is not referenced to the body anymore, but it's your body. The bottom of your body is still going to be pushed based on the bottom of the screen, right?
So we do bottom of the screen minus the height of the legs, are you saying? Yes, but I'd like to go another route. So for now, let's just add our right leg, then we'll go back to our body, right? So our problem right now, everyone sees it, is that our body is not touching our leg, right? Because our body has a set height, right? So let's create our right leg, and then we'll work on making our body reach our leg. So exactly the same process. I'm going to be lazy and copy my left leg and just change everything to right leg. So our right leg. So right leg height is the same. Right leg width is the same. Right leg bottom is the same. However, our x-axis for our right leg is going to be different, right? So what's the difference?
It's still going to be body, but instead of being NS layout attribute, it's going to trailing, it's going to be leading, and then the other is going to be trailing.
Yeah, so we'll do right leg leading because it's going to be the left corner of our right leg. Copy paste. Right. Until we go in landscape mode. So really the big thing that changed here, of course, was to change the variables and constants in our first three constraints. But in the last one, instead of doing trailing, which we had for the left leg, we did leading because our right leg position is based off our left side, right?
Did you also say right instead of trailing? I think you said those are interchangeable.
For now, yeah. There's a minor difference. I don't want us to worry about the difference right now. It's when you have more relations that comes in here. Anybody have any questions on that? Very quickly.
If you want to move the legs up, couldn't you just increase the constant?
But do we want to move the legs up?
It depends on how you want to see it.
Right, because our legs, unless we want our legs to change, not our body, right? But our business rule is we want our legs to stay the same, but our body to expand.
Oh, okay.
Right?
So then change that.
So we also have a chicken and egg problem because I can't, when I define my body up here, I do body height.
Height doesn't exist yet.
Height doesn't exist yet for my legs, right?
Yeah.
Our legs are not defined yet, so we cannot access something that's not defined here.
Right.
But if you do the opposite, then your leg
But the left
will not be
legs-
able to refer to the position of the body because it doesn't exist yet.
Exactly. So what we can do is we can actually override constraints. So at the bottom here, I can do body height dot constant. Let me see what we had it as here. So we had vertical position. Okay, so I want to copy this at the bottom just so we can reference it. So over here, Yeah, just like a reference. I don't need to copy that. You can look at my screen. So we have to change the 2 item, right? Because our body height is going to be contingent to our legs, right? Or do we set the body? There's 2 ways. We can either set a starting point and a ending point. So right now we have a starting point, right? And we have a height, right? So the best way to do it is, instead of setting a height, is to totally remove our height and just have an ending point for our body.
So it would be
Right?
body bottom.
Yeah. So we could do let body bottom position equals okay. Command and then either left or right bracket.
So stupid that they don't have shift that.
Shift what?
Shift that.
Oh, shift tab. Yeah.
That's what Sublime has.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. What's really handy also in Sublime is you can do multiple selects.
Oh.
So you can like have a cursor here, 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 and here, and change all the lines at once.
That's awesome.
They had that.
In what?
They don't have that in like when you're.
I wonder if there's a plugin. I've been lazy to check. I'm sure there's probably something. Okay, so the attribute we're changing now is no longer the height, right? What are we changing? So we have a starting point.
So and it's now an attribute dot bottom.
Yeah. And then what's the bottom of our body gonna?
It's the leg.
So we can pick a leg. So go left leg.
Leg, and then it's gonna be their top. So we already have the height of the body, but here we're adding a new constraint, which is going to be the bottom position.
Yeah. So we can actually remove the height,
Okay.
or what we could do, we could change the priority, right?
We can or we should, because if you have more than one constraint for more or less the same thing.
It's not good practice. So let's just remove the height. If we want to keep both of them there, we can just add a priority. But I say we just remove the height here because our height is determined based on our 2y positions, right?
And is it okay, like, to define body at the top without defining its height?
Yes. Okay. So we have our body bottom position. So what's our last step?
The self that you
Add constraint. No need to be multiple, right? Because we're only adding one. Right?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. They're both in the same position. Now if we refresh our little Paz toy resizes.
Something to add to your resume, guys.
I was just thinking you can make a game. Yeah, you're going to go to the game. Or go to Wednesday.
I'll do a quick review because we went through a whole bunch of stuff. First of all, preference. Do you guys prefer interface builder or code? Personally, I like code for these because interface builder, it's easier up front, but when it comes to like drawing code and like referring old code, this is much more explicit. It's much easier to tell what's going on. Whereas interface builder, you have to inspect each thing one by one and kind of start inferring things. So this is much more explicit. And even though it seems counterintuitive and a bit more of a pain in the ass at first, for me, this is actually easier. Thomas, do you have a preference?
For what? I'm sorry, it was.
IB versus code? Or Alea?
I don't know. Sometimes, actually, most of the time, code. Also, when you start working together with other people in your storyboard, if you think you've seen that merge conflicts, you haven't. You haven't.
Now, we took this route, but this is not the only route to lay out this view, right? Because constraints are flexible. As long as we meet the requirements of width and height and x and y, we can actually go different routes about this, right? We set the body to be flexible according to the leg. We could have set the legs more flexible to the body. We could have set each leg like a mirror to each other. There's a plethora of different routes we've gone about setting this view. But I think this was the easiest way to get there. We did duplicate some code, right? So the left leg, right leg. A lot of those properties are pretty similar, but it's very explicit and it's much easier in my opinion to see what's going on.
So can I programmatically combine springs and struts with constraints?
You can.
In code?
Now, would you want to? This is another question, but yes, you can.
Dave, what code did you add some code in the middle of your thing there, page?
In the middle?
Yeah. Is the let body bottom position the only block of code you added?
Yes, but I also removed the body height from the top.
Okay.
There's no good reason that I can think of to combine springs, struts, and this.
Well,
Springs and struts are just shorter.
They're shorter. One reason would be you lay out like your parent view in springs and struts, or it's easier, and then everything inside there could be auto layout. But there's no reason.
If you have 20 items on your view, you can have 1,000 lines of code just
So classes can get very long, but I mean, this is you wouldn't. There's no reason why you wouldn't do this in interface builder. But like I said, like I have a loop with 6 buttons added draws or something like that, and that's like also 40 lines. But that's like more something that will happen more likely than drawing a guide.
And like you said, there's no way to break this up into smaller blocks.
If it bothers you, once you're done.
So let's refactor our code really quickly before we move on. So let's create a function for each body part. So to create the function, let's do it for a couple body parts. I don't want to spend any more time on this. So I'm going to create my body at the top here, so I can reference it later. And then instead of doing just body, I'll do self.body. So my body, yeah, I'm setting up here so I can reference it from everywhere else in our code. So now, I will create a function at the bottom of our screen here. Yep, create body. Part of my job is like auditing code in a lot of different languages. So very often I'll do something in different language. So create body up here before everything else. And then we also need, sorry, the last line here. Okay.
Did you delete the top or just copy?
I cut from the top to the function. Now, one thing to note here is if we reference body anywhere else, we have to do self.body because body is now a class property, right? So if we took that route, we would just do create body, create left arm, create right arm, and so on. Whenever I do this, that's the route I usually take.
And this is two.
And basically that just makes our code neater. So instead of having this function with, with 100 lines of code, we have this function with just 5 lines of code. And then those other pieces are broken up into their own functions. Remember one of the things I said during our first few weeks was our functions should be single task use, right? And they shouldn't be too long. So our unit loader now is huge. And actually, to be fair, unit load will be one of our longer functions because that's where a lot of stuff initializes. But the rest of our functions should not be very long. And there's no reason for us to have all this in unit load. This should be broken up.
Can you just go down?
Yes.
That's not it. I thought your create body function.
Yeah, so our create body function is right here.
Oh,
So it's really, execution is no different.
It's not different.
It's just preference.
It's just good practice, clean code.
But if we were to keep it like this, you would mark this down.
Wait, what?
You wouldn't get something wrong, for example. We kept it the initial way that you had it, you set the body first.
So all we did here was just refactor our code.
Yes.
So it's neater. So our body code is now its own function, right? It's exactly the same thing as having all this code here, but now we just have a create body function here.
So in a typical app, how much of your code is actually logic versus these layout constraints and stuff?
Logic versus data constraints.
Yeah.
What do you mean exactly? Well,
Like you have 10 items on your view, you might have 500 lines of code for layout constraints, but only like 100 lines of code for logic.
sure. Yeah, it depends on your view, right? A lot of times our views will be mostly drawn in Interface Builder, and so are constraints. So if your most of the time if your views and objects are in Interface Builder, you should probably do those constraints in Interface Builder. But if you're adding your views programmatically, then your constraints need to get programmatically.
I mean, there can also be a lot of logic. A very advanced class will go from somewhere to 200 to 400 lines of code and even more. So, I mean, now it's constraints, but it's not because we're not doing constraints by code that you're going to have only classes that are 60 lines of code. They're going to get long, even though you try to be as nice and possible with your code and how you write it, but you need a lot of code to make code alive.
Yeah. Now, if you were to build a big application or a game, right, and you had a whole bunch of robots, the best way to do this would be what? Would not have this in all this code in here, right?
We create a class.
We create a class and do a new object, and the new object would do all this for us.
Would you have a class for each robot?
You have one class and just instantiate a new robot. And our classes can draw stuff for us as well.
and if I didn't want to have the robot unloading the app, if there was a button that I could press or something, that would not, then it remains the same, only it's not within the view that load
Yeah.
function, it's just outside it.
You have a function that's like draw robot, and that would either have all this code inside or call all the significant pieces for the robot. All right. Questions? So steps for drawing constraints programmatically. Number one,
Define the object.
define the object, right? If it's not already defined.
Change the background code just to be able to see it.
Change properties.
Yeah, and then subview it.
Add subview.
And then if it's not rectangularized,
If it doesn't have a frame.
do that.
Right. Well, so because we're doing constraints, we have to always do that. We have to do the set translate array size mask to false to override it and set our frame to constraints. And then add the constraints.
And then you do subview that add sub-constraints.
Add constraints, exactly. Now, one more point here is everything belongs to our self.view, right? But we could have theoretically had a box on our robot, right? So if I had a box, if I had like a robot container, instead of doing self.view add constraints, I would do robot container.add constraints, right? So if I had another container around my robot, another container here that was robot container, and that was the UI view, right? And these were subviews of that. Instead of doing self.view.add constraints, I would do robot container.add constraints, right? Because it's nested within another container.
Instead of me asking you what if the body was inside the head.
Exactly.
Is the process similar if you want to do a non-square based shape? Use different calls for the constraints?
For the constraints, it's the same. Now, the way you draw them is different because we've been working with UI view.
Yeah.
So you can do UI Bezier curves, but those get a lot more complicated. It's not beyond the scope of this. But if you want to draw a circle, you could do rounded corners, and do rounded corners to be the width and the height of the whole thing, and that makes it a round object, right? With what we've learned, you should be able to build anything. There's, for extra fancy shapes, there might be use cases for it, but I almost always go this route.
Are we covering CA shape layers and stuff in class? Otherwise, I might go over it.
I think you should do that during the workshop.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
do it on Sunday.
We have more options of shapes.
So CG rect is clear, and then with corner radius, you can have a circle. What about a triangle?
Yeah, you have to get fancy. If you think about it, what's the use case for a triangle? Because all the view is a container, right? So if you want a triangle,
It's a square.
you can have a square in half. You can rotate it. You can have an image that's a triangle, right? Why would you want to have a triangle for your app? You can just have an image in there.
On a drawing person.
He's trying to tie a bow tie together on this guy. You need a triangle for that. I went with tie instead.
It's a free country. I wanted to
So let's go over midterm, and then we'll finish up with a review of everything we've done. So let's load the midterm PDF. It should be under assessments, and then midterm. So that's to be done here. Is to draw a calculator. A requirement for the calculator is to preferably use auto layout to lay everything out. But don't worry about, it's not a requirement for us to make the calculator work in both portrait and landscape. Let's have just the portrait as a MVP. And then if you have time later as a bonus, you can do the orientation. So basically, the calculator should have the basic calculating functions like multiplication, addition, subtraction, get the percentage of something. Those are all laid out. Let's see. We should have clear buttons, be able to clear our operations. Now, one thing that's not listed on here that I want to clarify is there's a order of operations for arithmetic, right? So things are in parentheses or multiplication comes before subtraction. Don't worry about it for this exercise. Do it as a bonus, but for the bare minimum, that is not required to do the operations, order of operations for our calculations.
So we actually have to have the buttons not read in the numbers or the text from a text field as a string.
Yeah.
Okay, buttons actual.
Yeah, exactly.
That we click on.
Exactly. So it kind of goes back to your exercise about drawing all the buttons. So. Now, whether you do all that through code or through Interface Builder, it's totally up to you. Definitely, I recommend teaming up. You can team up with up to 3 people. Disregard the due date down here because we're a class behind and this is wrong. The due date for this is February 22nd. So it's not this Sunday, but the following one. So we have a week and a half.
What's the
At midnight.
URL under resources?
Yeah, so there's a couple things I want us to do to get familiar with the workflow of building apps. Number one, wireframe your shit. Don't just program. Always wireframe. Remember, brain dump, brain dump. I'm totally serious. Like I've seen, we're too late in the course, and I've seen a lot of folks not wireframe stuff. Get your thoughts down. Put it down on paper, do Keynote, do PowerPoint, do Dynamic, do wireframe CC, whatever. Lay your thoughts down before you start programming. And then after you have your wireframes, there's a quote in there about Trello. It doesn't have to be Trello, but break everything down to tasks, right? So task number 1 is build your function calculate. Task number 2 is lay out your skeleton. Task number 3 is build your class for your calculations, and so on. And get in the habit of laying down all those tasks so we can learn to break down these problems as much as possible before we start coding. This is a super important step. This is really the main purpose of the midterm, is for us to be able to break down a big problem to smaller abstract problems. I recommend Trello. It's free, it's easy, you can collaborate. So if you work in groups, you can assign tasks to folks.
So that's a wireframe.
So Trello is a task manager. So you can add to-dos and assign them to folks.
Asana is also a really good one.
Asana is a very good one.
I can show if anyone wants to see what a Trello board looks like.
Here. I can show what Trello looks like.
They're also great for like life things. Yeah, so you're moving, like the Trello board. Your baby Trello.
Nice.
Right, so we have boards.
It's just online.
It's online. You can literally drag and drop to-dos.
You can add columns.
And here's the cool thing is you can also tie Trello to Slack. So if you build a group chat room, whenever someone adds to-do list or moves to-do list, you get notified on Slack. So you have one place to kind of centralize everything. Super powerful. Like, let me show you how that looks like. So we hook it up here. Yeah, you see Trello right here. And move the cards so it's notified in Slack. So super important, to-do lists. I'm gonna close this because this might be a priority. Confidential information. So to-do list is super important. Wireframing is super important. Definitely at least pair up, just so you get in the process, in the mindset of working with someone. And I recommend using GitHub to collaborate and merge changes.
No, that's not gonna happen.
Huh?
You know that that's not gonna happen.
Why not?
I'm kidding.
You guys have the to-do date. It's February 22nd. It's not. Do you want some?
What's the time?
Alright, so then everyone in the group will have to submit that via separate GitHub accounts and turn it on. How does that work?
No, just give me names of people you're working with, maybe in the project itself, and a README file, README or MD, and add the members of the project.
Not to be a pest, I know, so our weekend is due the 19th.
Yes.
Is it possible that we can do it later in the month, because it only gives us a few days to?
We're gonna be working on finals. Hangman was supposed to be due today or tomorrow. That was my mistake for not clarifying that, but I mean, Hangman, you already had it a week ago. I can certainly help if you guys need help. Midterm has definite priority over Hangman.
Okay.
Hangman is due 19th. Did I really do that? Did I really say next week?
Yeah, you want to see?
It's okay, I believe you. I'm losing my mind.
I believe in your Sonaka message you sent it to you as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I thought too, and then I pulled this up, like, oh, it's due the 19th, great.
Okay, any questions on midterms?
So when you say, the app contains screen with desired buttons that adjust calculator display accordingly, that just means like, you start from a blank, clear all, and you type in 959, the screen should display 959.
Yeah, exactly.
Without any logic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also one thing to note is I want us to think about models, right? So models in our application are custom classes. So most of your logic should be in your model, right? So you have like a math model that has addition, subtraction, etc. You might have a model for a calculator. And Tomas and I will help you guys on Monday. Monday we're going to spend the whole day on laying these out and starting kicking this off. I recommend that you guys, at least during the weekend, start wireframing things and set up your environments, create your projects, create your Trello boards, your GitHub repositories. If you want to get further, please be my guest. But at least lay out the basics, and then Monday, Thomas and I will be working with you guys.
When you say model, yes.
Wednesday.
When you say model, are you referring to models within MVC, the MVC concept?
MVC, right? So in your project, you create a
Model view.
you create a sort file over here that's like calculator or like math.
You're gonna have a class for the buttons, a class for the mathematical.
All right. It'll be tough at first, but Tomas and I will be happy to help. Also, since we don't have class Monday, I'm heading to office hours on Monday and Tuesday. Tomas, there's something Sunday for office hours?
Yeah, I can do office hours after the workshop.
Yeah, cool.
So I think it's
Otherwise-
going to be 2 hours, like no promises though, depending on how fast we move. Maybe.
At
2
least
hours is
It'll
quite
probably be-
optimistic.
It'll probably be like 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah.
4 hours for a game job.
That one.
That included lunch though.
That was lunch, that was
Yeah,
terminal, that was.
That's the 4 hours.
Plus the good officers after that sort of.
It's here, yes. So download Sketch, guys. Tonight, download, install it. I'm not waiting on anyone to download it on Sunday.
Yeah, Sketch is awesome. Even if you're a designer, Sketch is really cool.
Once would you willing to offer?
Could we review the model view controller paradigm?
Yes, yes.
Because like, I feel like
I'll
model
sleep over it
and the modal understand it, like when we were doing examples, but if you asked me to explain it to you, like, I know that I couldn't do it.
Yeah, let's do a quick high-level review of everything. We can hone in on certain subjects for you guys. Okay. So I have my view, right? So if I have a button here, do something. I tie this to a what? To a controller. Right. So this one inherits from UI view controller class, right? So for every scene we have and every view controller we should have a controller, right? So the controller kind of like triages our views in our model, right? So our model, let's say we have a model for animal. We have the button, instead of saying do something, we say create animal. And in the controller, we have, IB action, create animal, right? So we have a function create animal. And again, this is IB action, right? Everyone's clear on this?
Yeah.
So when we touch this, we hit this button, and this button we can say var ina equals animal, and this refers to this class right here.
Animals and animal.swift file.
Yeah.
And so those three things are the model view controller relationship. Okay.
So whenever I want to grab objects or data that's structured and that's blueprinted, which all our applications should have structure, I refer to my animal, right? So the controller pretty much grabs data from my model and passes it to my view, does stuff to my view. So it takes actions from views and grabs data from models and then passes data back into views. Right? So here I can say something like, if I have a label here, now over here I can say label dot text equals, and in my animal model I can have something like function speak that returns a string. Right? I'll do return woof. So here, I say label the text equals ina dot speak.
Yeah. Cool.
Right? So view, controller, model. Now this is going to make a bit more sense when we go into persistent data, because usually our models are referred to data that already exists, right? So when we start saving our data, that's where models are going to make a hell of a lot more sense. But for general functionality that is business logic, like our math operations, those should sit in our model as well.
So when we go into persistent data, is that, are we going to deal with databases and?
Sorry, which one is view model?
Oh, yeah.
Model view.
So this one's the view. The controller is a view controller to Swift. And then the model is your custom Swift class you create. Before I continue to review, guys, please do surveys. I'll continue reviewing in a second. Cool. So questions about MVC? The model view controller? Okay. What else? Questions?
Yeah.
Notifications? Okay. Rob, did you raise your hand?
I was just wondering, like we've done table view controllers a lot. Have we learned how to like actually move to another view controller, like clicking one of the rows in the table view?
We haven't done that. No.
Okay.
No. We can cover that.
Is that
Sunday.
Yeah, we can do it. That's super easy.
It's easy, and I have table view in my thing, so I'm gonna.
Yeah.
use it.
It's just another method. That's all.
You also need to get settings visual.
Yeah, let me go to notifications. Oh, we get set.
Yeah.
I'll push another way again. So the notifications, we have two kinds of notifications, right? What's the first kind?
The post, it's like universal,
That's meant-
singleton.
Well, so they're all singletons, right?
Yes.
So what's a singleton?
It's a single object that captures.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an object that we instantiate from a class, but it's a global object that we have access to from everywhere, right? Everyone's clear on that?
Yeah. But do we have access to it from everywhere on our phone or everywhere in the app?
In the app. In the app. Everything is a copy of the app. When it comes to files, when you save things, it's a sandbox environment. So it's always in your black box of the app. Otherwise, there'll be security issues. So it's like Android used to have. Okay. I developed an Android too, but and it's not as bad anymore. But you used to have lots of issues like that. Okay, so notifications. Basically, I think of it as a cloud, right? So by default, we get certain notifications. So we get notification for give me some of those. Give me one of them is for errors, for memory warning.
Low battery.
Yep. Low battery. What's that?
Sort of update.
Update your iOS.
No, these are notifications that we get through.
It's your device is overheated or it's too hot outside.
Yeah, so warnings. We'll people as warnings. Another one is whenever we type text, right? Type text in text fields. So there's quite a few of these. Point being that these are already provided to us in the notification singleton, right? So when they're provided for us, all we need to do is add an observer, right? So we almost always add an observer in a viewed load. So if I have a controller in my viewed load, I do NS notification center. I want to do the whole thing. Dot add observer. Now the observer, add observer, has two things that we have to modify in there. What are those things? So notification name, which refers to these specifically, right? And then the function that we run after that notification gets triggered.
That's the selector.
That's a selector that has a call at the end, right? So we hit observer, we give the notification name that we're listening for. Whenever this gets triggered, we run the function that's available in observer. And the function we have to custom build, right? So observer usually goes in viewed load, almost always goes in viewed load. Question of the scenario so far? So this is for existing notifications, right? This single step this second step we always have to do. But the first step is taken care of for us because notifications already exist, right? So in situations where we build our own notifications, we have to do a post notification. So we post notification with an NS notification center.
Default center.
Default center, very good. We actually do default center, yeah, for every time we access notification center. So post notification, and we just have to give it notification name. And all this is a custom notification. Right? So whenever we press a button that sends notification to everything listing for it, that's where we do the post notification. Right? So this is always action dependent, right? So we pass notification name, and we also pass an object. In our scenarios, we've left the object usually nil. Can someone tell me what usually goes in the object? What? So we could pass anything in there, actually.
Yeah, anything really.
So by default, we've just done nil. We could theoretically pass data, right? So if I had an array to pass to my other two notifications for listening, I could do that. But as bad practice, the only thing we're going to pass as our object is a message that describes the state, right? So if my notification is to I don't know, to type text in text field, the object would be like, you know, the text was added to the text field or something. Something describing notification, but not the data itself. So notifications are not used to pass data; they're just used to set events, pingers of certain states.
Because data should be passed through delegation.
So the messages are custom messages that we type referring to whatever action we're using.
Used to, or I thought you said when we aren't using the custom notifications, we want to build our own. There's always 3 steps. Step 1 is post the notification. Step 2 is add the observer.
Yep.
And then is step 3 just add the function.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Run the function.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Create the notification.
Cool.
name.
So question on this?
Not that left get sent.
So get set. This is for our protocols.
Yeah, which goes hand in hand with delegation.
Yeah. Cool. So we'll review delegation. I think that was also a question from a few folks. So first of all, I'll do get set. So protocol, can someone tell me what protocols are?
Instructions.
Yeah, instructions are rules, right? Right, they set expectations for our classes and then instructions. So I'll do a protocol of flying. And over here, we do variables and constants, right? So I do variable, I don't know, number of wings, which is a Boolean, right? And over here, we can have a get and a set. So what this does is when we have a class that inherits from protocol flying, and we have the wings variable in there, we can both set the wings variable and get the wings variable from the object. If I just had a get on here, and I had a class of, let's do class bird. From protocol flying. I have a rule, right? It will yell at me because I have to define wings. So do var wings equals true. However, if I now do var Tweety equals bird, I can now do Tweety dot wings equals false because my protocol only lets me get the value of my object. I cannot set it.
Okay, because it's been defined as true
Exactly.
in the class. That it's inheriting from.
So every time you instantiate it, you can't
Exactly.
set it.
So if it was get set, it would be, or when I do my class birds, I'd say, I basically say var wing's true, but I could change it in my
You can
object.
change it later.
I could
Exactly.
change it.
Exactly.
I missed that one for about bird feeding.
So if I do a set here in the protocol, I can now do wings equals false. I can change the property.
Okay. But I just have a second here.
Because I don't have a set, I can't do that.
So you just get it.
Yeah.
As you write.
Change it.
Andre, you have a question? Anybody want to go over delegation before we close up? Dave, your question on that?
Yeah. I just figured it's a big review.
Yeah, let's do a quick review.
Could you talk about like how you presented it in a way that I feel like you were like instructing us on like what it is, as well as how to do it. But could you review it in terms of like how you should approach delegation?
Sure. Yeah.
Like a typical starting point, and then what you're thinking about.
Sure. So, just to keep in mind, delegation is used to pass things between two view controllers.
Right.
Right. That's what delegation is used for. It's for passing things between A and B. A and B, right? So delegation is basically me getting things from B to A, right?
Okay.
Or A to B, depending on how I set it up, right? Sure. So if I want to get information from B to A, I've got to set the protocol on which one? B. Right? So B has a few rules. B has set protocol.
So let me just stop here for a second. It was like the terminology in my head, I guess, is like different. So like B, do you think of B as the sender? Like, do you think of B, is delegation like B is sending information to A, or is delegation the fact that A is fetching information from B?
You're never fetching from, you're always sending to.
Sending to. Okay.
Exactly. So we set the protocol here. Over here, we conform to protocol. We also have to define the method the protocol gives us, right? And I'll explain it in a second. So the way this sends information to here is this runs a function that belongs to this. So if I have a function here that says update to-do list. Right? So in my code here, I have func update to do. And then here, I would have, for example, to do item. So item, and this will be a string, right? So what happens here is whenever I press a button here, it says add. This add button goes back to A and run update to do on A with this item with data from B. So whenever I go back, this runs update to do that belongs here, and the parameter that passes there is data I get from here. Right, so there's another step here. Over here I do a var delegate. No, so here I do var delegate, which is a protocol, right? And over here, yeah, so over here, before I go over there, I find B, so I say var B controller equals, and you know the whole method before you switch programmatically, you say, perform either with segue or find view controller, present view controller. So this becomes present view controller, and we have to find the view controller, right? So before then, I do B controller dot delegate. This is very important. Equals self. So what this does is this finds the delegate variable over here and sets it to point to A. So delegate, this is very important. This is the most important part. This delegate now becomes a reference to this. And this is how we can do delegate dot update to do with item, right? It's because delegate points to this class, and the function that we're calling in the class, the method we're calling in the class, is on this side, right? It's an A. Yeah, Sela?
Why is that an optional, the var delegate protocol?
Because when we are defining over here initially, we are not giving it a value. It does not have a value unless this passes a value to it. So over here, when I do B controller delegate equals self, that's when this gets a value, right? So if I had a C here, and C went here, this delegate will not be defined, right? Because C is not passing anything here. It's not referring to itself. So this needs to be functional, standalone, if it's being pulled from somewhere else. Delegates just practice, 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 practice.
Yeah. I feel like doing it 20 times, it will be such a no-brainer.
Super easy, yeah.
No, it's really that easy.
It seems intimidating because there's a couple more steps than we're used to, but it really is things pointing to each other, right? So B controller delegate refers to delegate over here. This conforms to the protocol here. When we do delegate dot method, it refers to the method we define here. And that's really the extent of it.
You call the function there from A that's defined in A. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So we're opening a bridge between two classes that are totally separate, two black boxes. And the bridge is this function.
Just fine. I get the high level concept, just to make sure that I get the very details of it. So the var delegate protocol name on